All you need to watch this video is a kernel of an idea, something that you're inspired to share with other people, because everything we're going to cover in this video is going to take you from having that idea and turning it into a production workflow that you are actually excited to keep up with for years to come. This is something that I have done since 2016. My very first podcast landed me my dream job in the Bay Area, coaching Fortune 1000 executives, professional athletes, and high performers from all walks of life. I then got to launch shows that have gone on to do over 1 million downloads. And so in this video, I plan to save you all of the overwhelm, all of the mistakes that I see consulting with clients day in and day out between the shows that succeed and the ones that don't. And a big part of that, quite honestly, is being able to just play the game and keep showing up. And you probably have heard that most podcasts do not last beyond 3 episodes, 7 episodes. Like, the drop off is absolutely insane. By the time that you get to 20 episodes, you are basically in the top 10% of podcasters. Remember, right now, at the time of this video, there are between 350,000 to 750,000 podcasts that are active worldwide. Now, I know that the total number is around 5 to 6 million or so, and that is again worldwide. But remember, out of those, only about 750,000 or less are actually active. So it does not take much for you to actually stand out, but it does beg the question, why is it so difficult to stay active? And so in this video, I'm going to go over all of those things so that if you're coming into this with not much of an idea, not much tech ability, not much software understanding, I'm going to give you all the tools that you can use to make this idea a reality. Now, before we get started, make sure to check out the links in the description below, because I've put things there from equipment to checklists and things like that, so that you don't have to talk to me face to face in order to press play on your idea. But if you do need some more one-on-one assistance, make sure to book a free podcast strategy call with me while spots are available. Most people are good to go within a couple calls, and I do have a system for helping you go from idea to launch within 3 months if you need some more hand-holding in the process. So make sure to check out the details on that below. I would love to help you out. Now, the first step is the most important thing, which is who your podcast is for. This step really dictates everything else, and you don't need any equipment to actually work this out. The reason it's so important is because if you are speaking to, let's say, a friend of yours that you have in mind versus, let's say, your target client versus, let's say, your parent, right? You're going to speak the same message in different tones to all of those people. And so who you choose and who you have in mind when you are sitting in front of the camera, when you are actually, publishing, and when you're ideating, you have to have a specific who, or else it starts to feel very diluted, right? You're speaking to multiple people at once instead of laser focusing in on one person. And so the who is the most important thing you can spend your time actually thinking about. And this is beyond just, are they, what age are they, and the typical demographics and psychographics. You want to get a little deeper than that. You want to dive into 2 things: the pains and fears that they have, and the hopes and dreams. Because if you can lock into those 2, now you're going to build a more vivid picture of who is sitting in front of you. And the chances are, if you're feeling a little confused at this step, or let's say that, you're not using this podcast for a business just yet, or a product or service that you already, have proven, then a good person to start with is your past self. So somebody from 5 years ago, 2 to 3 years ago, what were the problems you were dealing with and thinking about? What would you have wished that you had scrolled upon? And that is where you can begin. Over time, what's going to happen is you will have listeners that begin to reach out that are pure strangers. One person who reaches out to you, I remember this used to keep me going for months, just because this person was so excited and obsessed with my stuff that it motivated me to keep them in mind when I was filming, when I didn't feel like filming, to actually show up for this person. And so this is very similar to when you are performing, let's say on stage, and the advice with public speaking is to pick a friendly face in the crowd, right? You don't want to look at somebody who's scowling at you, because you're going to start overthinking and you're not going to be able to maybe bring your best self to the performance. On the other hand, if you have a product or service that is already proven and you've sold to a specific type of person already, if you've done this several times, let's say you're a nutrition coach and you have a roster of clients already, you're in luck, because what you have to do now is just really define who you like to work with the most, because you're going to find in your roster of, let's say, maybe 60, 70 clients, you're going to have so many different people that you might like to work with, but you want to think about who would I want 100 more of? And that is who you begin to build a lot of your messaging and things like that around. If this podcast is serving the purpose of, getting your product or service in the hands of more people. The next step is a simple one, but it is truly identifying what your intentions are. So being very clear with what your intentions are with the podcast is important. In the beginning, it might be kind of I don't know, I just want to kind of explore this creatively. I want to try it out. That's totally fine. But if you feel like, hey, I'm building this as a tool to help my business, be clear about that from day one, because remember, you only have 52 shots a year if you publish one episode per week. And if you're doing, let's say, 2 a week, then you have about 104 shots, right? And so keeping that in mind, you want to make sure every opportunity that you take to record is very purposeful and you are excited to show up for. Having a clear purpose for what function this podcast serves for you is very important. If you are doing this purely just for marketing and you're not really that into it, you probably won't go very far, and you can just save a lot of time and money by going with some type of social media platform that is designed to work way faster for your goals. But I would say that for me, when I first started, my goal was to learn how to talk better, right? Connect with people who are in my industry, really kind of find my place and learn from the best. And as I did that, a lot of other avenues and doors and things like that opened up. But I didn't have this goal when I first started of this needs to hit 1 million downloads, or I need to make this much money and I'm going to do it through this specific way. But I have started other shows where I did have those pieces in mind, and you shorten the time that it takes to actually achieve some of those goals if you're clear about them. I've helped people monetize within 1 week of launching their podcast, but that is because we did that by design. Okay, so we've got the who and we've figured out why you want to do your podcast. The next step is going to be about picking the right format, because the format, just like the who, dictates every other decision. If you decide that you want to do a live podcast in front of a bunch of people and there's 2 or 3 speakers, guess what? That's going to take some extra production planning, and it's going to take some extra effort to actually sustain and keep up with. And so you want to pick something where you can see yourself showing up for this. And this is where you have to be honest, because in the beginning it's exciting and you're like, yeah, of course, I would love to do a live version of this every week. But you don't want to lock yourself into that, because one day, whether it's 3 weeks down the line or 3 years down the line, when you aren't really liking that format or that topic that you chose, you will feel very boxed in to what you have created, which isn't fun. And I've seen that happen. You build this thing up and it's very successful and it's not quite what you expected or not what you wanted. And now it's a little more difficult to maybe pivot into other things. So how you avoid this from the beginning is by choosing a format that feels you from the start. And so for me, I always recommend most of my clients start with the lowest production possible, right? So a mic that is, less than $100. My very first mic that lasted and still actually works is $60. It was a USB microphone that we got to use for the show that did over 1 million downloads with my boss as well. And so that mic has taken me a lot of places. And similarly, I've had many clients who have gotten away with the $50 versions on Amazon. And so making sure that you have equipment that you know how to work, that is simple to get going, is going to reduce the barrier to entry in the beginning. Even if it isn't, the new 8K crispy version or in a studio with a skyline in the background, you still want to trade that off if it's going to allow you to actually show up. Now, I will cover live studios for a second because this option is something I've seen more clients beginning to use. And this is true in cities like Miami or LA and places where there are more and more live studios popping up. And the benefit of this is that you basically walk in and get to rent studio time. And instead of setting up, the perfect studio in your home or in a separate place like your office or whatever, you basically get to go to a place that already has everything set up. And many times the cuts are done live as well. So while you and a guest are talking, you're able to go back and forth, and you might even there's options to basically get the produced files as well. So sometimes that can be a very headache-free version, but it is good for if you're working with really high-profile guests, or you really want to prioritize an in-person setup. I've had clients I've talked to that are like, that's the only one they want to do, and that's important for their format. So you want to consider, that as a viable route for you. But for most people, you are going to be in a scenario where you are recording either remotely or your format is recording in person. And this is what I mean by format, where okay, if we are recording remotely, now, do you see yourself recording with a co-host, or do you see yourself recording solo? Do you see yourself doing a lot of guest interviews, or do you see yourself doing more solo episodes? My recommendation for this, I'll cover both briefly, but my recommendation if you are doing a remote podcast is to basically do a mixture of solo episodes and guest episodes. Unless you have a steady co-host already, doing that is going to give you the most flexibility and control of your schedule. If you rely solely on guests, I've seen clients who have been held up for months. Their show never even gets going because you're just waiting on other guests, and before you know it, excitement's fizzled out and you feel kind of beholden to their schedule, of course. But if you do solo episodes, yes, they are harder to grow, but they are more common and normal now than they were when, podcasting first began. This format is something that is harder to pull off, but it goes a long way, and actually it builds a deeper level of trust sometimes with who you're speaking to, because the way that you are when you're talking to a guest is of course a little bit different than you might be when you're just talking straight to the audience member you have in mind. Now, the benefit of doing this format is that you can have guests in periodically, but it doesn't feel like, oh, I started with guests, and if I don't have one, then it seems like I can't find anybody, and the show only goes on if I do have the right guest. You don't want to create that kind of expectation for the listener. You want to create the idea and the vibe that this is your show, right? These are your ideas, and you're going to introduce them to guests that you feel are going to talk about some of the things you want to, but that is not the only substance of your show. Consider the option of doing solo, because although it is hard to get good at, it's worth it, because, it helps separate you as a performer compared to a lot of the other people out there. Now, let's cover the in-person version. So if you do the in-person format, a couple things change, right? Now, all of a sudden, you're not using your laptop and a webcam for the camera. You're going to actually consider a legit camera of some sort. And my recommendation, there's a video on it, but I also will just tell you it's the Sony FX30. I recommend this as the camera because there's, no recording limit and things like that. You will basically get really great video quality. It's designed for this, and I'm shooting on it right now. I've also had so many different cameras over the last 10 years, and I would say that I wish that I just started with the Sony FX30 instead of all the other ones that I had to go through to get here. Now, for your in-person show, let's say that you are trying to get 3 different camera angles. So maybe you are considering 3 different Sony FX30s, or you're considering one Sony FX30 and one iPhone, or maybe you just want to do something that is better than the iPhone or allows your iPhone to stay kind of free, right? Because a lot of times you might be using it for some stuff, and although the camera is amazing, it may not be viable for actually filming day to day. So the Sony FX30 is my recommendation for the camera, but of course, if you are thinking about using an iPhone or getting an iPhone or used one just for filming purposes, going with something like an iPhone 12 to the iPhone 15 Pro is brilliant. These both allow for really professional options that are honestly better than anything that was on TV like 20 years ago, right? So if you think about it, what you need to get started is going to depend on the in-person option with the kinds of guests that you're having on. If they're very high profile guests, you might want to consider the more professional looking Sony FX30, but you also want to consider where this is going to be set up. So are you using this to build out your home studio? Because this is something I recommend. I do this with many of my clients, because once you do this, not only can you use it for work and Zoom meetings and all that kind of stuff, but it can double up as being able to record in a way that feels you. It doesn't feel like this artificial YouTuber version of you that feels like, a little cringy. It feels like, okay, well, this is me, this is where I am, and you're in my world, right? Because that's the benefit of podcasting, is the focus is more on the words and what you're saying, not so on all these crazy effects that are going on just to kind of fake you into holding attention. Now that you've decided your format, the next thing this is going to open up is your equipment. Now, your equipment is dictated sometimes by the format that you're choosing. So let's start with the remote setup. If you are doing a remote podcast, you are going to have a microphone. I've listed some affordable options in the description below, and I've also listed, the Shure SM7B, which is top of the line. And then I also want to make the distinction here that you've got USB microphones, which go directly into your laptop, and then you will have XLR options. These have 3 pins, and this needs an audio interface to basically, connect it to your computer. And so in that case, you are going to use the Scarlett. I recommend the Scarlett 4th gen. I really love it. But if you are getting a microphone like, let's say, the Shure MV7, that already comes with a USB option, and so you wouldn't need something like that. But if you got, let's say, the Shure SM7B, this does not have a USB option, and so you need the XLR to go into the audio interface, and then the audio interface goes into your laptop. And so the recording in a remote setup is going to be typically directly into your laptop. Now, what I recommend for you to use is Riverside. Riverside is basically the remote recording studio that feels like a step up from Zoom, and it gives you more flexibility, especially if you live in areas where your internet might come in and out, or that might happen for your guest. Being able to capture the highest quality version of both the audio and the video tracks is something that Riverside allows you to do with a little bit more flexibility than something like Zoom. What's really nice about Riverside is that you can record directly into here. It keeps all your files organized in one place. And if you are working with, let's say, an editor, giving them one link to the project and handing off everything is very easy. And if you are going to be editing things yourself, I'll get to that part in a second, but Riverside has become an option that is very easy to learn and that I teach many of my clients. Now, if you are doing an in-person show or recording, then what you need to consider is basically what you're going to record into. Are you using your laptop to record into like a GarageBand or Adobe Audition? Or do you want something like the Zoom H6, which is something I've used for years as well? This is something that is a recorder, and you can have up to, let's say, 4 different speakers and 4 different XLR inputs going into it. And that is one way that you can record where you don't need a laptop. And so I always recommend going with the laptop and the Scarlett because I think it yields a higher quality and more control than the Zoom H6. But if you're looking for ease and portability and kind of just, a headache-free option, the Zoom H6 is something that works really well. The only problem that I've noticed with it is like if your mics are close to each other, like you and your speaker are sitting across from the table, and the person you're talking to talks very loud, if your gain is turned up just a little bit too high, that will get picked up in the other speaker's microphone sometimes. And so there's little issues like that you might encounter with something like a Zoom H6, but the more modern versions of that are probably much better at cutting out background noise and things like that. So you should be fine. But that's just something that I want to point out. You need to keep in mind what you're recording into. Is it your laptop, or is it a recorder like the Zoom H6 or PodTrack? Now, the next piece of equipment you want to consider is going to be lighting. So this is something, whether you're recording remote or in person, you really want to do a good job with, because lighting has more of an impact on your video and picture quality than the camera itself. Because you'll notice when you even get something like the FX30, if you have really bad lighting, you're not doing yourself any favors when it comes to getting the most out of the camera that you might be using. So make sure, again, to check the links in the description, because I put my lighting options that I recommend there. And I've spent a lot of years with bad lighting and testing a lot of options. I have more lights than one person should ever need, but it's something where I have finally found a flow that I like and I understand it. But that is an area that I would recommend that you spend a lot of time getting comfortable with. And if you are going to be in environments like setting up a home studio for yourself, this is way easier than if you are constantly traveling and need to be setting up lighting based on changing environments, versus once you get the lighting components, the tripod, the softbox, you can kind of set it into a good position and hopefully maybe even leave it there or remember where you put it each time. And, I just find that for me, a 10 o'clock position where it is basically above me a little bit, right? So it's not like at eye level like a lot of ring lights are. That can be harsh, especially if you wear glasses. You would see the ring light constantly in my glasses if it was in front of me. So figuring out the lighting, it takes some time up front, but once you do it, try to remember exactly what you did, where things were, and if you can leave it there, that is a huge part of making it very easy when you have an idea to sit down and record, which is one of my favorite things and one of my main principles, which is owning your means of production, right? Similar to how musicians and rappers, like, the most expensive thing is renting studio time. And so a lot of people, if they can afford it, they build that inside their home so that when you have an idea, when you want to practice, when you want to shoot, you can do that without needing to call out an entire videography team or going into some professional studio. Now that the equipment is pretty much selected, and again, feel free to ask questions or book a call with me if you need some help kind of putting some of your options together. I'm happy to do that. But the next step that you're going to focus on is going to be software. So the software that I recommend, again, is going to be Riverside for most situations. If you're recording remotely, you're going to be able to basically in one click get 10 different clips out of your conversation. You're going to be able to in one click get, a rough version of basically the, audio file, the video file that needs to be uploaded into the respected places. Riverside used to be a tool that you just recorded into, similar to Zoom. It didn't have as many advanced editing features as it now does, and it seems like they're going to continue investing in that to make it a very easy to learn editor. And so I recommend learning this first because of its simplicity and really, really quick learning curve where you might not need to learn anything further for quite some time. And if that's the case, check out my full video on Riverside. I've recorded a tutorial on exactly how to navigate that as a beginner. But if you need other software options that are a little bit more robust, then I would look into something like a Descript. Okay, that would be if we were in the crawl stage, we would do a Riverside. If we're in the walk stage, we do a Descript. And then let's say we're in the run stage, now you would use something like a Premiere Pro. Now, this is going to be, let's say you're doing an in-person show or recordings, you're typically going to be needing to use something like a Premiere Pro or a Final Cut to be able to, let's say you want to color grade, like that, those are things you can't do in something like a Riverside or Descript. And so then you would need some more robust software to handle that. But again, for most use cases, I found that Riverside does the trick within a couple clicks at this point. And of course, you can also further customize things. And that used to be limited back in the day with what you can tweak and adjust, but it's becoming very, very easy to use. So I recommend you check out my tutorial on that and use that as kind of your main software for recording and editing if you're going to be doing a remote setup. The next piece of software you're going to need is going to be hosting software. So this is basically what distributes your audio file to all of the different platforms that are out there. Remember, in different countries, there are different apps that are popular. It's not just the main ones like Spotify and Apple. And so you want to be everywhere that you can be. And so Buzzsprout is the app that I recommend for that. I've used Libsyn, I've used all sorts of stuff over the years, and I have clients that use Substack and stuff like that. But I recommend going with Buzzsprout. They have great analytics, and it makes it very easy for you when you are ready to launch and to continue to keep uploading episodes there for you to get listed in new directories as they come out. So if there's a new app that becomes popular, it takes one click and your show gets pushed out and is available on there as well. This is also where you're going to be making master changes to, let's say, the name or description of your show, and maybe adjusting the description of the episodes or titles. All those things are adjusted in this one place in Buzzsprout, and then those changes get pushed out, within 24 hours to all of the respective platforms. Now that we've gotten some of the logistical things out of the way, you're going to focus on some of the more creative decisions that are actually really important, similar to the who that we started with in the beginning. And these decisions actually amplify everything you do over the next several years. So basically what we're going to start with now is what your episodes are about. What are the episodes that you're going to record? So go ahead and draft basically 10 episodes and start with the titles and try to make them under 50 characters. Try to make them as close to what it would be like when you are publishing this, because this will give you a great sense of what the one-liner for your show is going to be. What types of topics do you cover? Those things are one thing to kind of start with, like, okay, I want to talk about fitness and nutrition and these other things, but it's a whole different thing when you get really specific and you now get to the end result, which is what we're reverse engineering from, which is the episode, the published episode. And so having the title and a series of titles can be a great way to focus all your attention and energy so that every single thing that you are talking about is not veering off into different directions and becoming a less potent episode, or you are not wasting one of the 52 shots that you get to publish. Because remember, podcasts aren't like something like an Instagram where you're publishing maybe every day and you get 365 chances a year. You're getting only 52 shots a year, or maybe 104 shots a year if you go twice a week. Make sure every title you select is something that is not just great for that moment, but is this timeless? Is this evergreen? Is this something that builds and people will binge in your catalog? Because that is very predictable behavior. When you have new listeners come in, they're going to consume several of your episodes. Some will start from the beginning, some will go scatter around and pick and choose what they want to listen to. But you want to create these options where, to your ideal listener, your feed just looks like a gold mine. And you can do that just by the titles. If somebody is considering being a guest on your show and they want to, look at what you talk about before they agree and say yes, they're going to scroll your feed and skim the titles. They may not listen to any of the full episodes, but they're going to judge it based off of the titles. So you really want to prioritize that, because especially on audio platforms, that's one of the main pieces of copy that gets people to actually click so that your episode even has a chance of being heard. Next up, we want to lock in the name of your show. So the name of your show is something you start brainstorming and thinking about early, because it's going to take some iterations for you to land on something that feels really good. And it's important to only go with something that is really energizing and exciting for you, because if you don't like it, this is one of the things that will be the cause of you stopping later. You're not going to feel as motivated to record a show that doesn't sound great to you, and you're not going to want to tell other people about it either if it doesn't roll off the tongue and feel like it's representative of you and what you like to talk about. Because once you have decided the name of your show, you can now move forward on the next part, which is getting your podcast cover art. Now, you can certainly do this part in Canva yourself, but I highly recommend, because this is such a lasting evergreen asset, that you go ahead and rely on a professional graphic designer, find somebody on Fiverr, get them to actually, bring about something that you feel proud of. And again, this part takes some time. It takes some iterations before you land on something that feels like, yep, this is it. So this is why you start this part of the process early on, so that, you're not locking into something prematurely that isn't a great fit long term. Now, the next thing you want to consider is YouTube. And this is now coming back a little bit to format. So I've been assuming that you are going to do a video version, but that is certainly not necessary. You might go with audio only. But of course, you will open yourself up to so many more options of being able to repurpose and being able to reach new people that you just would never have had access to by doing the video version. And that's just because of the clips that can come from it, the visual format that can now be on YouTube. And again, remember, YouTube announced earlier this year that they reached 1 billion active users of monthly podcast content alone, right? So just 1 billion people consuming podcasts on YouTube's app alone. So it is becoming, and it's personally, my favorite app to consume pods on, even though I don't watch them all the time. It's just kind of like I'm listening there. So you want to make sure that you can do what you can to be there. And if you do decide to do that, then you're going to use the MP4 file that comes out of Riverside to obviously upload the video version here. But this now means that you need to also consider a couple new design assets that will become a part of your weekly workflow. So it's good to begin planning for that now. The way we talked about how on audio platforms, you basically have your cover art and maybe the title of the episode to get the click. On YouTube, you have the thumbnail and you have the title to get the click. And it is mostly sometimes the thumbnail that actually drives the click, right? And this is really important because if you're not getting the click, you're not getting anybody to consume it. And so focusing on that part is, worth doing. And so along with titles, the next step you need to plan for is your thumbnails, right? And I recommend coming up with some kind of template or format that you can, or style that you can repeat. But the things that might change are some of the elements or the words that go on your thumbnail. And so this is something that you're thinking should complement the title. So it shouldn't just repeat what the title says already. It should be like if somebody skims the title and then they look at the thumbnail or go back and forth, does it reinforce like, yeah, I should click. This is promising what I think it is. And that is basically the purpose of those two things. So having a thumbnail designer, goes a long way if you can afford that. That is something that will give you also probably options that will get you higher click-through rates and more visibility in many cases. But getting good at this skill yourself and understanding how to do it, even in Canva, not having to learn Photoshop, is very helpful, right? You can feel more in control of your production and getting things out if you do that. Now, the other thing for YouTube that you're going to want to think about is going to be your banner art, right? So this is the stuff that is on your channel when somebody clicks on your channel. It's at the very top. Again, this part I recommend doing yourself on Canva or getting a designer to do it. And you want this one to feel really good and simple, especially on mobile, because it does look a little different on laptop versus mobile versus iPad. But prioritize the mobile version and make sure it gives a good representation of your channel. Now, the next step is promotion. So once you have shot your episode, once you have published it, the next step is, okay, how do we promote this thing? And there are a variety of ways to do this. Of course, YouTube is great because it both serves as the actual long form piece itself, but because of how YouTube works, it's also its own promotion channel that gets you a lot of top funnel discovery. So it's a great idea to lean into that and publish shorts there or publish more frequently. Do what you can to take advantage of that platform if it's working. But the next thing that I would consider is to look already if something is working. So for many of my clients, Instagram seems to be the thing that they are using, or LinkedIn or X. And so whatever your main platform is, that is something that you want to pair with podcasts. Because remember, podcasts are basically a middle a funnel tool, right? It helps build trust. It's long form, but it is not the thing, unless you're doing it on YouTube, that is getting you the top of funnel attention. That is typically achieved through shorts or, other tools like that to bring people into the longs, right? And so whatever you are using for that, don't ignore it. If you really do want to have a big Instagram following and that's important to you, use podcasts as a way to power that. If you've been feeling like, oh man, I've been wanting to write a newsletter for months, but I never actually sent anything out. Well, guess what? Use your podcast as an excuse to get the newsletter out. Whether it is, hey, I have a new episode that dropped, go listen to it. Or whether it is, transcribing it and repurposing it as its own asset, as an article. This is how you go from this podcast being like a hobby or the standalone thing that is just, you don't know why it even exists, versus it being something that is an ecosystem, right? It's powering the rest of everything else. There's a reason that everything exists and it kind of all feeds into each other. Now, the final thing I want to leave you with is in regards to deplatforming all your listeners. So basically what you want to do is there's two games you're playing. One is the platforms. So for example, YouTube. The game on YouTube or Instagram or all these places is keep people there as long as possible, right? If you keep them watching, they watch longer, they will reward you with more people. And so in the beginning, you're just getting YouTube and all these platforms to have enough data on who this thing is for in the first place. But the other game that's also being played is for you. You want to typically get that listener off the platform onto somewhere else, right? Whether it is to subscribe to your email list, whether it is to book a free call, whether it's to buy your product or service, whatever those things are, you typically want them to go from one place to another. And so you want to basically make those opportunities available. Now, the links in the descriptions are the most important thing to consider here. And you can even go ahead and put trackable links there so you can see which videos it's coming from. But I recommend making sure that you identify what is the biggest action item that we can get somebody to do right now. And if you're unsure, you don't really have an idea, I recommend going with something like a newsletter or a freebie, right? Getting people to sign up for a free tool that gets them to give you their email and their name. That is the equivalent of getting someone's phone number back in the day, right? That is a core piece of data that even if YouTube changes their algorithm or Instagram changes their policy and, you lose everybody overnight or you get locked out of, your X or LinkedIn, you still have access to this list of names and emails of your top listeners. Now, I would recommend looking into two softwares. One is going to be Kit and one is going to be Substack. If you're going more the newsletter route, you want something simple and you're just kind of, you don't plan to make freebies and kind of build kind of a funnel and need landing pages and stuff, Substack can be a great option for you to get started. But if you are going with the route where you want to build a freebie or you want to build follow-up systems and things like that, Kit is very, very valuable in doing so. And this is a way that you can build in, for example, every time somebody new comes in and downloads your free tool, for the next 100 days, you can make sure that all your top episodes are being dripped out to them. Of course, at first you don't have these, but over time as you do, you can guarantee, hey, on day 5, make sure to check out this episode. That way, it's not just about, what got published today and tomorrow like we think on an Instagram feed or grid, and then it just kind of disappears into the ether. This stuff, everything you build is an asset that is going to give you traffic for years to come. And I can attest to that, especially with YouTube. It's really crazy when things randomly pick up and you'll start getting hundreds or thousands of views per day on a random video that you did years ago. So you want to build as many of these as possible. And then you can probably imagine as you hit 100 episodes, or you get closer to that, you will probably have a solid 5 or 10 episodes that are doing most of the heavy lifting for you. It's just the fact that it took those other 90 attempts to also, get to the next 10 that were the most important. So you have to keep going, and you have to take as many at-bats as you can. And getting to that 100 episode mark, the reason I mention that is because a lot of doors open up for you. A lot of higher caliber guests are looking to see if you've done that many episodes or if you have that many reviews. And if you pass that 100 episode test, people know you've been doing it seriously and you care about this thing, and it's not just a new show that they're going to invest time in and that is going to fizzle out, right? So a way to kind of ensure that in higher caliber guests' minds is by putting in the reps and making it to episode 100. So I hope this was useful in helping you get started. Make sure to check out the links in the description below for all the equipment, all the tools that can kind of help you in this journey. And again, if you need some more one-on-one help, book a free podcast strategy call with me below while spots are available. I would love to help you out how I can. I appreciate you taking the time and hanging out, and I will see you on the next one.